Welcome to the Inner Green Deal podcast. Is sustainability realistic? In this final episode of this first podcast season, my colleague Liane asked Fernando Garcia about the state of our planet and whether sustainability is a realistic focus. Should we hold on to a belief that we can live in a sustainable way with 8 billion people on this planet? Or should we start thinking about the possibility that this may not be realistic and start reflecting on what is truly worth saving, what we need to let go of, and what we need to come to terms with? Fernando is a former Director of Health and Wellbeing at the European Commission. While he's not a scientist, he's one of the most informed citizens I know. Since he retired 2 years ago, he has been attending and facilitating retreats where he explores how we relate to nature. In this podcast, he raised some tough questions, but also offers answers that not only present a more realistic future, but also one that is more enjoyable and in connection with ourselves and with nature. And as I just mentioned, this is the final episode of our first podcast season. We look forward to continuing this journey together. For the next season, we will open up the podcast platform to new facilitators and guests. If you want to join our podcast team or be an occasional contributor, send us a message using the contact details in the podcast description. We'd love to hear from you. Equally, as we're all volunteers, we would welcome financial donations to cover the costs and support the ongoing functioning of our podcast. Anyhow, we really love making this first podcast season and look forward to continue the journey together. For now, enjoy this special episode with Fernando Garcia. We are Liane, Steven and Jeroen Jans, and thank you for joining the Inner Green Deal podcast.
So welcome, Fernando. You have been deeply committed to environmental work for more than 10 years now, and especially to the work of Jim Bendel, Deep Adaptation, to the Transition Network, and also to the work of Joanna Macy. So I'm curious, how did this commitment all come about?
Well, I've always been very fond of nature. I was born in a small village in northern Spain, but basically the big paradigm shift happened to me in 2009 when I read an article in the New York Times with the title, "The End is Near." And of course, that was a compelling title, very catchy. And what was inside this article was a description of the transition towns movement, which had started a couple of years before by Rob Hopkins. And it was basically a description of what was that about. I read the article with lots of interest and immediately got shocked by some of the things that Rob Hopkins was saying there. And I bought the book, which was published at the time, the Transition Handbook. And I went for a training with the transition people back in 2010. The contention there was that our society is based on very fragile foundations, and climate change is a real threat, and peak oil was the other threat. So those foundations are very shaky. And from there, one of the immediate implications of that is that I went vegetarian immediately, and I started revising my own behaviors. And then I moved on. There was a period when I became director for a sort of a corporate social responsibility in the European Commission, the internal social corporate responsibility, and I was pushing for the EMAS agenda, the environmental impact of the Commission as an institution. And then in 2018, which was a very important year in my life, I spent 1 week in the mountains with a guide. It was very tough. And I also accompanied my mother in her dying process and retired. And since then, I've been in quite a journey, I have to say.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And how would you describe your role nowadays in all of that? Do you see yourself as an activist, or do you have any other description for your role?
I find it difficult to describe myself. Probably the closest thing is post-activist, as Bayo Akomolafe calls it. It's a very complex concept. If I take the model of the transition towns and the transition handbook, is a model which is divided in 3 areas. The head, the heart, and the hands. My role in the area of the head is I'm waking up at the reality of this planet, and I'm learning a lot, spending a lot of time reading about that. I'm a citizen. I'm not a scientist, but I spend a lot of time reading and listening to podcasts and watching and reading articles and reports. And I'm sharing that. So in terms of my head, this is what I'm doing, capturing information, understanding it, and sharing it. In terms of the heart, I'm trying, because of the emotional impact of that, I'm trying to really reconnect with my body and with my spirit. And the work that reconnects with Joanna Macy is important. I'm doing some work with spirituality. I'm doing work with death. I've been in a couple of retreats, and now I'm going to start a program to become a death doula, somebody who accompanies dying people. And in terms of my hands, I'm a facilitator. It's quite a transformation, because I used to be a speaker, and it's a completely different profession. So I'm trying to transform myself into a facilitator and a guide. I'm part of the facilitators in deep adaptation. I didn't mention that, but maybe we can talk later about that. I'm doing training. I'm a trainer. I'm training. I'm running an online course in the Spanish Transition Network. I'm quite an activist in veganism. I've been a vegan for 5 years, and I'm quite a bore talking about veganism. And basically, I'm learning sobriety. I'm learning to be more austere, and that's difficult. So in a nutshell, I'm doing something in the area of the to-do list, in the outer path, as Paul Chefurka calls it. But mostly I'm very much in the to-be list, in working on who I am in the middle of this predicament.
You just mentioned your incredible interest in reading about science. So I know that you say climate collapse is unavoidable. So how does science actually support this thesis? Can you say a little bit more about this?
Thank you, Liane. Yeah, indeed. I would like to stress again that I'm not a scientist. I consider myself a well-informed citizen, somebody who reads the articles that you find in newspapers about the environment, and reads also the reports which are mentioned in these articles, and searches and looks at podcasts, etc., etc. So I'm well informed, I think, as well informed as one can be with something as complex as climate science, So that's. But I've come to this belief. And I'm not alone. I was looking the other day a statistic from the French Institute, the IFOP, who asked 5,000 people in France, Italy, Germany, UK, and US whether they think that collapse in the coming years is likely. And I was surprised to notice that 70% of Italians said yes, 65% of French, 52% of Americans, and only 39% of Germans. Who knows why? But I mean, I'm not alone in this belief. And that's the first reason. The second reason is, in this universe, everything has a beginning and an end. I know that I'm going to die. And we should all know that we are going to die. And I know that all societies, all civilizations up until now have collapsed, have disappeared. The Roman Empire, the Mayas, the Aztecs, they all have disappeared. And there is a lot of research there, Tainter, Globe, Diamond, and some of them say that normally they tend to last 200, 250 years and then they collapse. So, and it's 250 years since the Industrial Revolution. So maybe it's just chance. But anyway, when I, as I say, I read quite a lot about these things, and I came with this model, I don't remember where it looks at the 7 spheres of what is going on in the planet. And when you put all of them together, because it's not only climate change, it's all over the place. So climate change is linked to what is happening in the first sphere, which is atmosphere, the greenhouse gases. And as you know, the most important one is CO2, where we have concentrations of around 415 parts per million, which is a lot, which is something unseen over the last millennia, And of course, this is what is causing global warming. And as you know, this CO2 stays in the atmosphere for years, decades, even hundreds of years. So even if we stop today, this will continue having an effect. The problem is that it's not only CO2, it's also methane, and that is more controversial, but there is methane emissions growing in the Arctic by the melting of the permafrost, et cetera, and methane is a very nasty greenhouse gas, and the concentrations that we could reach in the atmosphere would be completely unbearable. So I'll stop with the atmosphere there because it's already gloomy enough. Second, biosphere. I mean, we are in the 6th mass extinction in this planet. And it's not me who's saying it. More and more people are saying it. I'll give you only one figure, which comes from the Academy of Natural Sciences in the US. When they look at the biomass of mammals on the planet, when they see, let's look at the mammals on this planet, they realize that 36% of the whole biomass is humans already, the almost 8 billion of us. 60% is cattle, is cows, pigs, sheep, etc., and I want to stress, just 4% is wild animals. So 4% includes all the whales, all the elephants, all the rhinos, all the orangutans, all the tigers, etc. Only 4%. We've destroyed their habitats. So biosphere, and not to talk about insects, where some people say that the extinction is up to 60% in some cases. Not to talk about the birds. If the insects go, the birds is funny because there was this statistic that I loved. We have 3 times more chicken than all the rest of the birds in the planet. So that's for biosphere. The third one would be, let's take for instance cryosphere, the world of the ice. It's melting. Simply, it's melting. I mean, the ice surface in the Arctic has been reduced. I don't know. It's something like half or 2/3 over the last 40 years, with the impact that it has in terms of the loss of the albedo effect. It's no longer white, and therefore it doesn't reflect light. I mean, it's the effect that it can have on the Gulf Stream, the effect that it's going to have on the sea level rise, etc., etc. So it's massive, and it's happening also in glaciers. The Himalayas are going to lose the glacier, which provides water for 1 billion people. Massive problem with the melting of the ice in the planet. Fourth, hydrosphere. What is happening with water in this planet? Look at the oceans. Warming like crazy. I mean, most of the heat has been stored by the oceans, and that's why the land has warmed less than it has, and is 1 degree, which is quite a lot. You see what is happening already with 1 degree in terms of wildfires and storms and hurricanes, etc., etc. Plus, the ocean is acidifying. When you mix CO2 with water, that gives carbonic acid, which is destroying the marine life, etc., etc. So let's not to talk about rivers which are polluted, etc., etc. So that's the hydrosphere. Fifth, the lithosphere. What happens with the minerals in this planet? The minerals we are reaching peak. I mean, an important mineral is the fossil fuels. Fossil fuels. Oil, coal, gas. They are not depleted, but they are reaching a point where the energy invested and the energy returned is no longer as interesting as it was many years ago. So it will come a point where it would be better to leave these minerals in the land. Same happens with very important minerals and metals like lithium, etc., etc. The depletion is all over the place. Apparently, uranium is also where some people think will continue running the power plant, the nuclear power plant is not infinite. So there is an issue, and of course the destruction of the habitats linked to mining. I mean, think of the tar sands in Canada. These wonderful forests destroyed simply to get this oil. Sixth is the pedosphere, and that is very worrying, which is the soil. the soil where we grow our vegetables is being destroyed massively, because of erosion, because of floods, because of et cetera, et cetera. So the soil is losing very gradually the capacity to grow things, also because of the type of agriculture that we've run over the last few years with fertilizers, et cetera, et cetera. The soil is going very poor. And the seventh one is the anthroposphere, us. 7.5 billion, according to the UN, going to 10 billion, with a level of inequality which has never been seen in the history of humanity, where a few 0.1% holds 40% of the wealth in the planet, with massive migrations which are foreseen by the Red Cross and the UN. They are talking about 200 million climate refugees by 2050. With and with what happens with the anthroposphere, I was thinking the other day of what Yuval Harari, the Israeli historian, said. Humanity has always been obsessed by three things, which are famine, plagues, and violence. And a couple of years ago, you thought, we are good with that. Famine is coming back and might come back even to Europe. The yields and the productivity of cereals and rice, et cetera, is going down very quickly. Plagues, I don't know whether you've heard of a thing which is called COVID, and it might be the beginning of a series of pandemics. And violence, I see it growing in the world. And so those are the seven spheres. Okay. Let me finish with one thing. I was reading the other day a fantastic, an eco-philosopher whose name is John Foster, who was writing, the title of the book is After Sustainability. And basically he says sustainability is denial. So what the people who believe in green growth and sustainability claim, they are keeping themselves busy, and they don't go beyond their business to see really what is it to be done with what I just described.
So thank you for sharing your insights and your knowledge. And I certainly have to take a deep breath now. It's quite challenging what you say. And at the same time, if that all is true, what you have said, what do we need to learn now? I mean, what kind of internal work needs to be done to otherwise relate to the effects of an impending breakdown?
Well, again, is my take. And again, I would like to clarify that what I said about the Paris Agreement is my understanding. I mean, I'm not a scientist. Maybe I got it totally wrong. And I would be very, very, very happy, because I'm a parent with two children, to be contradicted. And Fernando, you're wrong. So I could be the first one to be very happy to be contradicted. But so that said, what do we need? What can we do with that? When you confront such a brutal reality, you're already ahead of the curve, because the first thing that we need to do is to wake up. That's the really first thing. And it's difficult. It's difficult. I mean, waking up, really looking into these realities up front, calls for a lot of courage, because basically when you confront these brutal facts, what comes out is fear, sorrow, helplessness, anger. These are the natural and healthy emotions that we feel when we confront these facts. I've been attending retreats in Plan Village, which is a Zen Buddhist monastery in southern France, where Thich Nhat Hanh has been up until recently. And Thich Nhat Hanh said something which I really loved. When confronting the reality, the first thing we need to do is to hear inside ourselves the earth crying. That's the first thing we need to do, and spend some time there. So waking up is the first thing, and it's difficult and delicate, because when you see this reality, very often you go into what I call, and I saw the other day that somebody else calls it, and so I didn't invent it, what I call pre-traumatic stress disorder, not post-traumatic. So you have a trauma by thinking of what is coming, But I also read, and I was happy to read that very often patients who suffer post-traumatic stress disorder very often also have what they call post-traumatic stress growth. And I feel that if you come from this and you go into this pre-traumatic stress disorder, this anxiety, you grow. So that's the first thing, wake up. The second thing is talk about it. Talk about it and you will see that you're not alone. I mean, whenever I really manage to have a deep conversation with somebody, most people suspect that the situation is not as good as some newspapers or some politicians want us to believe. So talking about it, ask for support. Eco psychology is becoming a real profession now. I mean, there are more and more psychologists who are specialized in things like solastalgia, which is precisely this anxiety which is created by the perception that the things are not going well in the planet, etc., etc. And then the third thing I could propose is precisely, I mentioned before, deep adaptation, which is a movement which started in 2018, and I'm a member and I'm a facilitator there. And the basic contention of deep adaptation is that near-term collapse is inevitable now. And therefore, we have to confront this fact. And what they propose is an agenda, a framework with 4 questions. I mean, I say they, but I'm part of them. So we propose 4 questions to frame the kind of inquiry and the kind of exploration that what we can do. The first one is resilience. When thinking about this predicament, what might happen to our societies in the coming years, what do we really want to keep? What is really important that we want to keep? And it's not only in terms of food, shelter, security, etc., etc. It's also values and behaviors, dignity, compassion, love. How are we going to do in order to ensure that during and after collapse, we maintain a good level of those things which are fundamental for our human resilience? The second is 4 R's. So the first is resilience. The second is relinquishment. What do we need to let go of now, not to worsen the situation? What are the things, the behaviors, the habits that we have, which are making things worse and that we could already stop now? And I mentioned that I'm a vegan. If you research the impact that industrial animal agriculture has, is huge. We kill 70 billion animals a year. I was reading the other day, if we fed the soja and cereals that we give to these cattle to humans, we are able to feed 70 billion animals. We would be able to feed 8 billion humans for sure. So relinquishment, you can relinquish meat, you can relinquish flying, you can relinquish the sense of security, you can relinquish the idea that you're not going to die, you can relinquish a number of things which are important. The third R is restoration. What can we bring back? Important things that we've lost over the last few decades. Silly things or simple things like playing cards rather than video games, talking to your neighbors, and also restoration also includes regeneration of nature. I mean, rewilding, etc. In there, a lot of included. And the fourth R is reconciliation. What do we need to make peace with? Who do we need to forgive? What do we need to embrace? And of course, the work with mortality, with our own mortality, is a fundamental one. Embrace your shadow. Embrace grief. And this is a frame, I repeat the 4 R's, just resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation. But there is a lot of ground that you can explore. I've been exploring that for the last 2 years, and I'm grown. And I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm not depressed. Do I sound depressed? I'm not.
You just,
and of course, yeah.
I just want to ask you. You just mentioned your Zen retreat in Plum Village. So, plays mindfulness a role on your path personally, or does that help, or was that just by chance that you attended one retreat?
Definitely. And let me give you a long-winded answer, because you realize now that I like speaking probably too much. My path, my inner path, actually started when I was 8, and I have a deep terror episode when I realized, when in the class of religion I was told about the end of the world, apocalypse, the final judgment, etc., etc., and I realized that I was mortal. Fair enough. But then after that came, an afterlife. But before and in between, there was a judgment, And if I was not good at the judgment, I could go to hell for eternity, which is long, especially towards the end, as Woody Allen used to say, So I've been living with this sense of I've managed to befriend this terror, because during my late childhood and early adolescence, I had this thing in my stomach, this awareness that our life is, there is a lot of illusion around that. So and since then, death and afterlife have been very present in my life, in my reflections. And what I've been doing lately, now that I have time since I retired, I've taken a journey of reconnection, and this is where mindfulness plays a big role. It's a reconnection with myself, with mindfulness. So I had forgotten that I had a body. I spent 33 years in the commission, and I might as well send only my head, because that's what was present in the commission. My body wasn't there, and through mindfulness and through reconnecting with my sensations, with my emotions, with my thoughts, by observing them, by befriending my breathing, etc., etc. I've connected with nature through my body, So it's been incredible, the journey. And of course, in my retreats in Plant Village, which the place is so beautiful, and so it's a pity that it's closed now because of COVID. But it's amazing. After my 8-week course in 2014 or 2015, I went immediately to spend 1 week there, and is there where I consolidated my practice. Definitely. But that's the connection with myself. Mindfulness has been useful for that. But I'm also trying to reconnect with others in a more authentic and deep way. And I'm exploring now a practice which is deep relating. Probably you know about it, where it is basically where you're having deep encounters with people, very deep, by simply asking the question, being here with you, I notice. And the other person answers, hearing you say that, I notice. Something as simple as that, with the previous practice of mindfulness, can be very powerful. And of course, the third reconnection is with nature. I spent hours and hours and hours in the woods, and I've been exploring rites of passage, ceremonies, which are very important. But indeed, mindfulness helps a lot to reconnect with the senses, and to relate with reality, not only through your thoughts, but mostly through your senses, which is where you really relate deeply.
So maybe one of the last questions, there are many initiatives out there, activists, and like you work for the Transition Network and the work of Jim Bendel, and they all want to reduce harm and that people live in a more balanced way or a more sustainable way. Now, if we zoom out and look at these initiatives from an economic perspective, what type of economy does this approach work towards? They all want to have a transition from economic growth to green growth. Is that the way we have to work towards, or any other way?
Yeah, thank you. And let me qualify, not all of them want to go from industrial growth to green growth. Some of them, and the most interesting ones, in my opinion, are into a post-growth kind of paradigm, because it's the only way. So what I see as common patterns in this new economy, more balanced, is that they tend to be very local. So they base their resilience in resources which are handy, So basically, they focus on the cake and import the cherry, whereas in our current society, we import the cake rather than the cherry. They are very respectful of the carrying capacity that I was mentioning before. They are very respectful of how much you extract, and how do you recycle, etc., etc. And in a way, I'm sorry to be a bit hippie here. I'm going to say something which comes very much from my heart. I see that these economies have an element of, they are sacred economies. They are based on full respect and love for nature. And let me share something that was very deep that I did the other day. I was in an exercise which was earth listening exercise, where you do mindfulness and you connect with the place where you go and you listen to what the earth tells you in that place. And the message I got from the land in the place where I was is that she is our mother. We made her sick. We sent her to the hospice to die, and we are using her pension. So unless and until we start rebuilding a love relation, falling in love really with nature, you could not do that to your mother, frankly. You could not do that to your children. Economy doesn't cover this, this love, respect, reverence for nature, because we are nature, and of course, this sounds very hippie, and some people are going to start rolling their eyes. This guy is on drugs or whatever. They can say whatever, but this is how I feel, and this is how indigenous cultures have established balanced relationships with nature, always from before. I'm reading a very interesting book which is called 1491. So it's the year before the arrival of Columbus to America. And it describes populations which were healthy, harmonious, in ecosystems which were relatively, very balanced, and we arrived there, and we brought them smallpox and misery, basically. So examples, I see many examples of this kind of economies. A typical or even stereotypical example is Bhutan, with this gross national happiness index. But I see the transition towns, I see eco-villages, and that might sound a bit like elitist. I'm interested and curious to see what is going to happen in Amsterdam, where they are trying now the donut economy model by the professor from Oxford, Kate Rowland, I think is her name, or Rowles or something like that. So the idea to build the economy within the limits and the boundaries of the planet. So to build an economy which meets the basic needs of the population, but it does it within the boundaries. So I'm curious about this model, and apparently Amsterdam is ready to try it. So let's see how it goes.
So we're about to end this podcast, but there's a delicate question at the end. So if you were the leader of Europe, Fernando, what would be the first step you would like to implement?
If I was the leader of Europe, I would Google precautionary principle and read that very careful. Because in my view, as I said, science shows that breakdowns and collapse are more than probable. But even if it were only possible, I think the responsibility of the leaders in our countries or in Europe could be to invest in adapting for that possibility. Maybe it could not be wasted money, if we started preparing in order to help our populations to meet their basic needs: food, drink, shelter, safety, security, in case this possibility, which in my opinion is more than a possibility and even more than a probability, might turn a reality. So I could be, if I was the leader of Europe, and I could never go there. I prefer to be in the woods, frankly. I could frankly revise all my policies through the prism of the precautionary principle.
Okay. So any last advice to our listeners from your side?
Well, yes, as a way to wrap up, one of the premises of the deep adaptation movement is that we should allow for a space to contemplate this possibility, this probability that business as usual is no longer an option, and maybe reassess your life and your work under that prism. So simply that, allow yourself to contemplate that possibility. My opinion is a probability. And tell yourself, who do I need to be in the face of this predicament?
Okay. So thank you so much, Fernando, for the time that you spent here. And I wish you all the best for your initiatives. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
When I reflect on the conversation with Fernando, I was impressed by his clarity and courage to look at reality as it is. His remarks on the poor state of the 7 spheres of our planet made it clear that we as humanity have long been in a process that is heading towards a collapse. Nevertheless, how we relate to this reality is what will define the years to come. In this context, he points to a much-needed internal, individual, and collective learning process. Mindfulness is one way to support this learning process by reconnecting to oneself. Without feeling ourselves, our mind, heart, and body, it is difficult to relate to nature and see and feel both the beauty and the dying process at the same time. But we also need to let go of greed and our desire for everything to grow faster, bigger, further, higher. The principle of unlimited economic growth can only lead to collapse. Fernando observes that many new, more balanced economies are very local, and I like the way he referred to some of these local initiatives as sacred economies that are based on love and respect for nature. His message at the end to reflect on who we are, to contemplate on who do we need to be given the fact that business as usual is no longer possible, also sums up the first season of our Inner Green Deal podcast quite well. We would like to thank you, listeners, and look forward to continuing this journey and exploration in the coming year with you. For the next season, we will open up the podcast platform to new facilitators and guests. If you want to join our podcast team or be an occasional contributor, send us a message using the contact details in the podcast description. We would love to hear from you. Equally, as we are all volunteers, we would welcome financial donations to cover the costs and support the ongoing functioning of our podcast. Anyhow, we loved making this first podcast season and look forward to continue to explore together. Thanks to my dear colleague Jeroen Jans for this inspiring journey. My name is Liane Stefan. Thank you for listening and take care.